understanding Burgundy, and now tonight trying to get a handle on some of the better known Hungarian wines. Now, I'll start off by introducing our guests tonight. In the center in the pink shirt, we have Zoltan Szabó, and in the left-hand side of the screen, our guest there is Szabolcs. Now, forgive me if I pronounce this wrongly. Falusi. Okay. And then on the right-hand side of the screen with the blue shirt, Zoltan Kovács. So thanks, guys, for joining in. We really appreciate it. And to have somebody from the actual wineries and from the country to help us along with the conversation is fantastic. Now, I'll just start off. I've done a little bit of research about Hungarian wines, and I'll just put up a map showing wine areas that in Australia we may recognize. So, Joe, could you put that map up for us just for a start? Now, we start off, Hungary has a very long history of winemaking. And as you can see from the map there, there's many, many areas produce wines, grow grapes and produce wines. But the ones I've heard of, which are probably ones more that other people in Australia have heard of, come from the 4 different areas shown there. Vilan is down to the south. It's more Mediterranean sort of climate, warmer, and well, I'd call it sub-Mediterranean maybe. All the soils in Hungary seem to have some basic volcanic origin, as apparently the whole area was volcanoes about 30 million years ago. But the wines from Vilan are mainly of the Bordeaux varieties with some indigenous grape varieties. And maybe one of our guests might be able to expand on that. Anybody jump in? No? Okay. The indigenous varieties there are Portuguesa and Kek Francos, and these are similar to the grapes grown across the border in Austria. The next area moving up to the northwest is Nagy Somló, and the white wine that's produced there has an interesting history in as much as it's meant to have all sorts of magical properties. It's a fierce white wine and you know, really quite acidic, very harsh lemon flavors, and apparently it was meant to be masculine, and the kings had sent their wives there so that they'd have male children. I don't know if that's a true story, but that's what I've read anyhow. So it's produces this really intense, quite, as I say, acidic, fierce white wine. It's been described as smoky or ashy in flavor, but fierce lemon, smoke, wheat, that sort of flavors. Again, anybody like to jump in and talk about that area or talk about the wine?
But just very briefly, Somló is the smallest wine region of the country. It's basically a single hill with volcanic origin, and the surrounding vineyards are a mixture with some loess. And what is really promising, some sparkling from the region. There are new producers using some of the Tokaji varieties, food mint hálslevelű, sometimes blend with international, but sparkling from Somló are, I think, has a nice future.
Thank you, that's great. The next area moving up to the northeast is Eger. Is that pronounced with an E or an A? Eger?
Eger.
Okay. And virtually all Australians of my age would recognize the wine, or the most common wine from there, bull's blood. The reason there is a story behind the origin of the name, which I'm sure a local can tell better than I can, but it's got something to do with fighting off the, scaring off the Turks when they were invading in the 1500s. But there's two wines produced there. There's a red, which is a bull blood, and then there's a white called Chilog. And both of these wines have to be a mixture of at least 3 in the red wine or 4 in the white wine, and 50% of that mixture has to be of an indigenous local variety, so that you're getting the wines there, the red wines anyhow, tend to be very, well, for me, I've had quite a number of bull bloods. As I say, it was the commonest wine you could buy when I was about 18 or 20 years old, and I'm now 73, so it's a long time ago. And I used to like it because it was a lighter style of wine compared to the Bordeaux. It was quite perfumed and had a real sort of cherry accent to the flavors. And I haven't tasted one recently, but they've improved, assured, really improved in quality, structure, and now are producing really quite very, very good wines. The white wine there is a mixture of indigenous varieties, and can include the ferment and Harsha Levallois, and another grape called Lyanka.
Yes.
But as I said, has to include 4 of these varieties, and if I'm wrong, tell me, but I think there's 13 varieties allowed in this area.
Yes.
Is that right? 13 different varieties, and 3 have to be included in the red, 4 in the white, and at least 50% of each have to be indigenous varieties. So the whites tend to be quite floral, and quite a super aromatic, really, you know, really floral and tropical fruits and that sort of thing. So again, if anybody can add something to this conversation, jump in.
Well, for the reds, they are also using a traditional grape variety, which goes back in the olden days called Kodorko, which is a lighter, fruitier style. So actually that gives the fruitiness and a bit of spiciness in the final blend of the bull bloods. And in the reds, they sometimes use also Welsh Riesling, which is Olas Riesling in Hungarian. But yes, as you mentioned, Leanko, it's one of the main components of the Chilog, which means star actually. So Agri Star, the white wine blend.
Yeah, maybe you could tell the story of the Star of Ega. There's a story that the pilgrims used to see the shining in the moonlight, the silver roofs of the wine huts on the mountains, yes, and guide them to the, anyhow. I'm sure there's a lot of these stories.
Yeah, we need to have stories.
Yes. So then we get to the most northerly area, surrounded or protected at the foothills of the Zemplin Mountains. And I think the Zemplin Mountains are where most of the indigenous oak for the cask come from. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. So Zemplin is the main oak wood producing area in Hungary, used for barrel actually. So they are very old volcanic origin mountains, 2-3 million years. They are very erodated. The highest peak will be something around 650-700 meters.
Wow.
But being bordering from the north, the wine region, they have a very important roll there. So they are like fences against the chilly winds from the Carpathian, located further to the north in Slovakia and Poland, actually. So they protect us, not only give us very good barrel, tight grain barrel for our barrels.
And the barrels have a different character to French or American oak. I've heard it described as creamy, sort of.
Actually, the oak species which is used here for the barrel and is growing in the Zemplén Mountains, it's similar to the French oak, the purest Quercus petrea forests, actually. It gives a lot of structure, actually, for what we experienced in our wines. But we mainly use new oak for our dries. For our sweets, we like, for Royal Tokaji, to use second, third use barrels mainly to keep in the wines the fruitiness.
Okay. Well, probably some more of that when we get to the last area, which is now the Tokaji, as I said. The Tokaji area was named after the village of Tokaji, and but there's 36 villages in that appellation.
Almost 27.
28.
Including
How many,
Tokaji.
sorry? 37.
28, yeah, 27 plus Tokaji makes the entire region at the moment, currently.
Tokaji can stretch or does stretch a little bit into Slovenia.
Slovakia.
Slovakia. Sorry, my geography. So the two wines that we'll talk about tonight are the ones we've sent out for tasting. There's the dry Tokaji, which is mainly produced on a single variety. It's oak aged, and then there's the famous wines that we all know, Tokaji, the Azu. And this is not to be mixed up with Tokaji wines that were produced in Australia up until 2003. Definitely by the end of 2007, they were called something else. But they were based on the Muscadel grape, not on the indigenous grape varieties of Tokaji. The most dominant grape varieties used for wines in Tokaji, I think, are the Ferment and then the Hassellevelou, and but there's also the yellow muscat, or is it orange muscat, that's used for bringing out some of the floral flavors. Now, we'll start off with the dry. Obviously, you can't start with the sweet wine. And if everybody likes to open that and pour a little bit in the glass, we can then have a discussion about that wine, and maybe we could talk about the vineyard for a start. So, Bolsh, would you like to start off and talk about the vineyard, the history of Aremus, its connection to Spain, and how the wine is made, how the grapes are, the soil that the grapes are produced on, how the wine is made, and the aging process, and we can then talk about the wine itself.
Okay, so I prepared I can change the background behind me a little bit to give some idea how the region looks. So we already talked about these not so high hills, 500-600 meters, but what is also interesting that vineyards cannot be planted really above 300-350 meters. We are in the north, so winters can be very cold, and it can completely damage or kill the vine in some extreme cold winters. And as Zoltán already explained, we have the protection from these north extremely cold airs. And but in these cooler areas which are not suitable for vineyard, that's where we get the oak. We will have some influence in the wines in the Mandolage as well. And also it will come later, but you can see maybe on the picture behind me the river which flows along the hills, which will be important later as we will arrive to the sweet wine. But what happened in Tokaji about 500 years ago is that if you go to the vineyards in let's say late August, early September, but you will mainly find this cluster what you can see behind me. And over 500 years, between the late 1500s and till the end of the communist regime, the late 20th century, this is what nobody wanted to pick, what you see behind me. And what you are tasting, the dry wine was made of these grapes. But if you don't pick these clusters in September, but wait a little bit more, you will see these strange raisin-like berries, which Zoltán will introduce and talk about. And that is essential for the sweet wines. And if we go back to the collapse of the communist regime, during the communist regime, the production of Tokaji and the production of all Hungarian wines was a monopoly of the state. So there were no competition. Everything was in a planned economy, and Tokaji was basically absent from the Western market. 99% of the production was sold in the Soviet bloc. I just saw a statistic in the late 1960s. I don't know, maybe Zoltán saw it. The total export of Asszú 5 puttonyos was 24 hectoliters in 1 year, Hungarian export. And with the collapse of the regime, the system changed. It became free to start businesses in the region. And some foreign investor appeared in the early 1990s. In the case of us, in the case of Oremus, it's a Spanish family who owns Vega Sicilia. So it's not so much the family who is so deeply rooted in the wine business, but the winery they purchased in the 1980s, Vega Sicilia. And after spending a decade managing Vega Sicilia, they started to launch their new project. So at the moment, if you can, it's nicely explained, the whole philosophy in the website, in vegasicilia.com or tokajoremus.com, it goes to the same place. You can find more information about the different projects. And one of them is Oremus in Tokaji. And the first 5-8 years was mainly about how polish and improve the quality of the sweet wine, which the reason which made the region so famous and made Vega Sicilia, the owners of Vega Sicilia, to come to Tokaji. But by the end of the 20th century, the early 2000s, we had to realize that only rely a Tokaji business, wine business, in producing sweet wine is probably will be impossible. So we had to start to find the way how to make a different style of dry wine, because dry wine were produced in the past as well, but they were a byproduct of the sweets. So in the other cluster I showed you, you can see in these super concentrated berries, but also in the same clusters, there are some absolutely normal berries untouched by the noble rot. And these grapes, depending on the harvest, sometimes you have 90% grapes without botrytis, even in October or November. Sometimes you have everything with botrytis. And in the past, when the winter was coming and still many grapes had no botrytis, they were not suitable for a nice sweet wine. They were used for the dry Tokaji. But if you pick your grapes in so late, in October, November, it will be a dry but very massive alcohol, 16, sometimes off-dry wines, acidity was very low. So this traditional dry Tokai was sold in the Hungarian market, even in Hungary, mainly in the Tokai bars and pubs. And but the sweet wine find their ways to really the royal tables of Europe, and then later other continents as well. So we had to make a different style of dry. And of course, we had to bring the harvest much earlier, which in the case what you are tasting in 2016 was a relative cool summer with nice rainfalls, but not the Mediterranean storms. So we had a slow ripening. We could pick in the middle of September for the dry wine. The warmest year will be 2018 so far. We picked in the 20th of August. So the harvest came at least 1 month, but 6 weeks before the traditional harvest for the new style of dry Tokai wines. And we also made many experiment with using new oak, although. So right now we fermented the 2016 dry Furmint from Oremus in 50% new oak barrel and 50% stainless steel. After fermentation, we blended the two and aged for an additional 6 months with the bottonage in 3 years old, more neutral barrels, and bottled in the summer of 2017. We really believe that one extra year in the bottle will really open the wine. So now this wine has almost 3 years in the after bottling, and I think it's at least what I have in my glass is still very fresh. And you have a little hint of the oak, the little vanilla, but of course minerality from the volcanic soil is very obvious. And Furmint, we also had to find clones types of Furmint, because the clonal selection of the 1950s preferred the types of Furmint which has huge yields. And right now what we need is low yield but more intensity. In this 2016 wine, we have about 10% of the Oremus clone. The cluster behind me shows a picture of one of these low yield Furmints, and you can nicely pick the elegant aromas of green apple, little maybe grated ginger. To me, is peach and white flowers is always part of the young Furmints.
Yes, I can on the nose detect what I describe as a lemon curd. You know, it's sort of like a sweet lemon, if you like. But the palate is really what is fantastic. It's got that length and breadth of the palate, and again, there's peaches and white flowers and some lemon. But it's that volume in the palate that's really really nice.
Yes, thanks. It's really tricky, and so this style of right now, I think more than 50% of the region produce dry wines. So they pick in order to make dry wines. So, and we really are learning a lot. And acidity, especially in 2016, was really remarkable. We feel the warming of the climate. So that's how I explain. Sometimes we have to pick in late August, which was probably, I think 2018 was the earliest harvest of the last 500 years in Tokai. Of course, because nobody wanted to make this style. So even in warm summer, everybody waited for the botrytis. But this nice acidity makes it perfect to pair with food, or even as aperitif can go very well. And this gentle, elegant aromas, for me, the favorite choice is always fish or seafood, which unfortunately is not, we are not so rich in Hungary without any sea, but I hope it's much easier for you to try a nice crisp dry Tokai wine with some fish.
Joe, what do you think of the aremas?
Yeah, I think excellent on the nose. I think that that oak is quite well integrated in there. It's sort of really binding all those flavors together. But yeah, for me, delicious. Really good length, but amazing sort of a freshness towards it, even after that. Now being 4 years old, that like you touched on, that acidity and that kind of really zestiness that cuts through. It's almost sort of a really mouth-watering style of wine, I think. And one question that we did actually have come in there was recommended food pairings, which I thought was covered really well in that that fish. That's the saltiness, I think, you know, sardines and that kind of thing, or you know, reef fish with quite an aromatic spice or pepper behind it would be delicious. Yeah.
Can I ask what's the genetic background of ferment? You know, is it related to Riesling? Is it related to, you know, genetically?
There are many concepts, but definitely we consider as an indigenous variety. I read many genetic researches. I don't know if Zoltan, Zoli, you know more, have more recent.
Yeah. So according to the most recent DNA searchings, Fourmint is actually related to Gouais Blanc, the French variety, who was also a parent of Chardonnay. So, and the Harschle value is a grape variety which derived from the Fourmint, actually. So from DNA point of view, Fourmint has a Gouais Blanc as one parent. There are no information which is the other parent of Fourmint.
Okay, well, maybe we could now move on to the Azu Tokay, and perhaps the other Zoltan Kovesh would like to talk about firstly the way that these wines are made. Secondly, the grading of the sweetness of the wines, and you know, any other stories that you've got related to the Tokai wines in the area, and then we'll try the and sorry, I missed out. Talk about the history of the Royal Tokai Winery. It's an interesting thing. I saw a video on YouTube with Ben, is it? Ben Hoxton?
Ben Hawkins.
Yeah.
Hawkins.
Hoken, that's right. Talking about a little bit about the history, but Zoltan, off you go. No, Zoltan from Royal Tokai.
Okay.
You've got as much time as you need.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the participants joining this tasting. Maybe I should start with touching the history of this wine, which was celebrating during the centuries at royal courts and very important persons, actually. And what made the fame of Tokai was obviously the climate and the indigenous grape varieties which are used for this historical wine, what we call Tokai Asu. So it's not only Tokaji. So in Tokaji, you can use the appellation Tokaji for your dry wines, late harvest wines, and the botrytis rich wine is called Tokaji Osu. So the climate was actually, and the geography which gave the first impulse to make these wines. And they firstly mentioned the Tokaji Osu in a written document in 1571. So those wines for sure were made even before that. And step by step, people discovered how to process those berries, how to get the whole richness from the berries, because, and as Szabolcs showed us some photos before, during the harvest, we are looking to collect separately, berry by berry, those botrytis-starched, violetish, brownish, dried berries, and we keep them separately. So we are not cutting the bunches, we just collect the berry by berry. And later on, we are going to use them to make the wine. And for that, we need something to macerate in those berries, because due to the continental climate of the Tokaji wine region, with very small precipitation. So if we compare us to Sauternes, we have 3 times less precipitation than Sauternes in the Atlantic climate. So we need something. Szabolcs has the photo very nicely. For those dry, desiccated, violetish, purple, brownish berries, we need a wine to macerate and be able to extract all the flavors. So we later in the harvest, we harvest some grapes which are used for so-called base wines. They have a higher alcohol potential than the regular dry wines. And we use those wines to macerate into them the berries, to be able then, after 1-2 days of maceration, to press the whole paste, the whole Osu paste, to get a very rich fermenting must, which then gives us the raw material, let's say like that, for our Osu wines. So it's a very important process of selection of the best quality of berries, and in the second step, to select the best base wines to macerate the berries. So it's always selections to reach the final product. The botrytis, the Osu. So Osu, it means also the quality of the berry. We call Osu the berries what we collect during the harvest, those botrytis touched berries which are completely dried. If you take one of those berries and you try to push it, you do not get any must from those berries. And the inside of the berries, it's brownish, a bit violetish. If you taste the berries, the pips are crunchy, very tasty, and later on we use those berries to macerate. So the 2 historical tools to make the Osu wine were the harvesting hods, as you can see in Szabolcs' presentation, with the berries in it. A harvesting hod could contain around 27 liters of berries, which result in about 22-24 kilograms. And behind the harvesting hod, the puttony, you have the Gönci barrel, 136 liter, which was used to measure the quantity of base wine in which we add 5 or 6 puttony of those berries. And the result of this maceration is the final wine, which is Tokaji Osu, 5 puttonyos or 6 puttonyos. So we add an increased number of puttony to the same amount of wine. So that's the reason why a 6 Puttonyos is more richer in taste, flavors, and obviously sugar content than a 5 Puttonyos. Let me say some words about our history, Royal Tokaji history. Royal Tokaji is based in one of the most historical places of the wine region, which is called Mad. And the founder of the company was Hugh Johnson. Hugh Johnson visited the wine region many times during the communism, in the 70s, in the 80s, and he always tasted tremendous Osu wines here in the wine region, mainly in Tortol from the Mézesmáj and in Mad from the different single vineyards here. And he was amazed about the quality what is produced in the wine region, and of course about the acidity what Tokaji can produce. And he had a dream that one time he can come back here and do something. And that dream became reality after the falling of communism in the 1990s, when he arrived with a small bunch of Danish investors, and they started the company here in Mad. They joined 62 small producers, and they formed the company. So the small producers, they get in the vineyards. Actually, that time the investor put together some money. They had the knowledges of the market, knowledges about marketing, how to sell wine. So the company started his work, and the first wine were produced in 1990. In the early days, so in the first decade of the company, Royal Tokaji produced only sweet wines, and was the first company after the falling of communism who reintroduced the notion of the single vineyard. So from the beginning, we made a 5 Puttonyos, what you can see in front of you, the so-called blue label. And beside, we made our single vineyard, 5 and 6 Puttonyos Osu wines. From first growth, great first growth called Mézesmáj, the first growth like Szent Tamás, Becsek, Nyúlászló, and we had also a second growth called Birsalmás. So we started like this, and till 2002 we made only the range of these Osu wines. In 2002, because the same reasons as Szabolcs told, we enlarged our palette to be more market prepared and sales prepared. In 2002, we issued our late harvest. And in 2003, we made our first dry wine. And in 2009, we launched our first single vineyard dry wine. So now we have also a complete panel of the wines which can produce in the wine region. To come back to our 5 Puttonyos with Royal Tokaji blue label. For this wine, we mainly use Furmint as grape variety, but could have Harslevelű as well in his composition. We use Osu berries produced by Royal Tokaji, but also produced by small producers. So we have quite long contracts, integration, sort of integration with small producers, and we buy from them Osu berries, base wines as well for this wine. And very often we buy Osu berries from the free market, from the small producers from the free market as well for this wine. So we can consider this wine as a nice wine region blend, which shows a very nice character. In Royal Tokaji, for our Osu wines, we always use very rich Osu berries, which are high above according to the standard in the wine region. And to macerate these osu berries, we always use a fermenting mast. There are other wineries which use still wine to macerate. Some others use just mast to macerate. We think that fermenting mast will give the nicest structure for the wine at the end. Fermenting mast, it's a very strong extracting media. So you need to have very good quality osu berries for this method, because if if it's not very clean and nicely botrytized and dried, then the fermenting mast will extract undesired flavors as well. So we carefully select all our osu berries, which we include in this final wine. And after 1.5 to 2 days of maceration of the berries with the fermenting mast, then we are able to press this paste and get a fermenting, very rich mast with high acidity, high sugar content, very rich in flavors. What we ferment up to the balance what we need to the final wine. Our 5 puttonyos, the blue label, it's always a wine which has an alcohol below 12 degrees, 11.5, and with sugar content which is above the level of a 6 puttonyos, according to the Tokaji standards. So from the beginning, we made a more generous 5 puttonyos, which could be considered a 6 puttonyos. And what is the most important thing is the acidity. The acidity, the natural acidity, which makes the balance in our sweet wines and which keeps very balanced the palate of our dry wine. So you don't feel that richness. So acidity, it makes it longer, focused, and well-structured, our wine. That's why having this very important tool, natural tool, the acidity, we do not really need a lot of alcohol to build up the body of the wine, and we do not need a lot of tannins, a lot of oaky flavors to balance the final feeling, the final taste of our wine, because is acidity which makes that. And if we taste the wine, which is 2013 5 puttonyos, then you will really taste the 2013 vintage. 2013 vintage was actually, in the last 30 years, the biggest osu producing vintage and very good quality producing vintage here in the wine region. It has a nice creaminess in the structure, delightful nose of honey and peachy, with traces of citrus and spice. It already has 6.5 years, actually. It's still a very, very, very young 5 puttonyos. But you can have it now, or you can cellar it for future enjoyment. It's depending on you.
We have had a couple of questions roll through the chat here, just as we're tasting this delicious wine. First, Scott Sharp asks, is ferment as a varietal more susceptible to botrytis rot than other varieties that might be planted in Hungary?
I can see those questions now. Okay, thank you. Samuel touched a bit the topic, actually. they are selecting for their dries smaller and looser bunches. For the osu production, we like to have more compact bunches. Compact bunches gives you the opportunity that the proliferation of the botrytis inside the bunch, it's much easier because if they are in contact, the berries, they can better infect themselves from berry to berry. So this is very important for us. Because of this fact, Furmint is susceptible for the proliferation of the botrytis, but we also have the climate. The climate which gives us the opportunity in late August, September to have that mist fog from the rivers and some later summer or some rains in the beginning of autumn, which starts and gives a kick to the botrytis to develop on the bunches. And later on, the very long, nice summer or nice autumn gives the opportunity to dry off those berries. And Furmint and Harslevelu as well has a quite thick peel, a thick membrane on the berries, so it could resist to the early attack of the botrytis. And later, botrytis eats actually the thickness and became more thinner this layer.
So the
Yeah,
difference,
yes.
yeah, the difference with Tokai and Azu and Sauterne is that Sauterne is made in whole bunches, and there's no base wine. It's just pressed. Whereas this is a base wine with the actual berries, single berries added to that, and then produced in that way. Secondary, well, it would be a secondary ferment.
Actually, there are a lot of differences in between Sauterne and Tokai. Of course, I mentioned one, it's the climate. We are temperate climate with less precipitation. They are more humid with the Atlantic climate. And that's why they can press the clusters, the half clusters, to have their final wines. And that's why we get more dried berries, and we need a second step for macerate the berries. Differences are in between the grape varieties. They're using Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc. We use Harslevelu, Furmint, and Muscat. Yeah, as you highlighted, there is a big difference between how we make the technology, the winemaking. So we also have a wine which is made on that way by direct pressing. It's also a traditional wine in the wine region called Samorodny, which has a sweet, it could be sweet up to 100, 120 grams of residual sugars. And there we have clusters which are overripe, halfway botrytis, halfway osu. So we have that wine from those grapes. And then in the taste, the huge difference in between Tokai and Sauterne is Tokai has a bit less alcohol and high acidity. I think it makes it very drinkable because of that. Sauterne should deal with higher alcohols, more barrel, to balance their lack of acidity in the final taste. So, yeah.
It's good. Thank you for explaining that.
I had a question. Are there many producers of Tokai Essentia? So everybody who makes Tokai Osu can make Tokai Essentia. It's a question of release it actually, finally, because the Essentia could be bottled afterwards or could be balanced back to the fermenting 5 and 6 Puttonyos Osu wines.
Also, just one note, when you pick the Osu berries, there were a question about the Osu berry. So you can pick them separately when it has about 50-60% sugar. And then as we collect them separately, you can get the essentia. But to have a reasonable quantity of asu berries, that's the big question. From 1 hectare, the yield, depending on the weather of September, October, it's between 100 kilo and 900 kilo. So if small producers with 1-2 hectares in an average year, they can pick, let's say, 500-600 kilo of the asu berries, which will be enough for make a jar of essentia. Yeah. So it's to bottle 5 liter and is impossible. So mainly you can find essentia in the larger estates with over 30 hectares in the better years. In the case of Oremus, sometimes from 50 hectares, we have only 200 liter. So it's ridiculous. But in the best, even in the best years, it's 1,500 liters from 50 hectares, the yield of essentia.
I can give you also, just to imagine how intense and work intense is the essentia and how small quantity is the essentia what we can get from our grapes. So if we take 1,000 kilograms of green grapes, what we use for our dry wine, during the botrytis and drying, from 1,000 kilograms of green grapes, we can get 200 kilograms of asu berries. And from those 200 kilograms of asu berries, you can get, let's say, 3, 4, 5 bottles of essentia, good quality essentia. So this is the ratio, actually, what you need to think about when you look at the prices of the essentia, which are still not enough high to represent the quality and the work what we have there. And then I had also a question: are asu berries a type of Furmin grape? No, it's an indicator of quality. Yes, so asu berries could be each variety, harsh level, muscat, Furmin, should be touched by botrytis. So you can see nice botrytis stripes on the berry, and it's dried off completely. So it loses about 80% of his weight during this process.
Essentia, I believe, in the expensive restaurants in London and New York, it's served just by a spoonful.
Yeah, we have a special package actually for our essentia. So for our 37.5 centiliter bottle, in that presentation box, we also pack a very nice crystal spoon. And sommelier likes a lot to work with that spoon actually all over the world. And the spoonful of essentia very often is given to the guests, and it costs in between $80 and $180 actually. Let's keep it in American dollars in the high quoted Michelin star restaurants there. Yeah.
So it really is the wine of kings.
It is the wine of kings and the king of wines. as Louis XIV said in the 18th century, in the beginning of 18th century.
If I may jump in, Paul, just for a few minutes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I introduce myself to the audience because I have been sitting here and listening to the very interesting presentations, because I'm a layman myself too. I work for the Hungarian Trade and Consular Office in Sydney. So just for the importers, if they wish to import Hungarian wines, I am the guy to contact. But what I want to add is that Tokaji actually is a very, very special and unique area. As you mentioned at the beginning, there are 6 major wine regions in Hungary, and within those 6 wine regions, there are 22 wine districts. Tokai in itself is one wine region. The regions are delineated more or less according to geographical boundaries, natural endowments, and winemaking traditions. So Tokai is so unique that in itself, it's a wine region and a wine district. And the other 21 wine districts are grouped in the other 5 wine regions. And what hasn't been mentioned yet, Tokai is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, an historic cultural landscape, including, of course, its winemaking traditions that give the region its universal value, its unique and universal value. I'm just asking the experts whether there are any other regions in the world where such methods, techniques are used for wine production as used in Tokai, especially for the Asu wines. I haven't heard of it yet.
No, no, actually, and this made the fame of Tokai actually in the past. Tokai is one of the few so-called classic wines in the world. So classic wine, we consider the Champagne, the white and reds from Burgundy, the reds of Bordeaux. So Tokai, because of its history, winemaking process and culture, it's also considered among the classic wines of the world. And nowhere they use such a technique as we use for our Tokai wines. Many countries in the past they tried to use the Tokai name for their wines, but now Tokai has a full protection actually in the world by the economic I don't know board. I don't know what's the name of that board. So France used it before for a special wine in Alsace. Italy used Tokai as Tokai Friulano. As Paul mentioned, Australia, they were still using it for something till 2007. So everybody tried to copy Tokai, but yeah, I think that's a good sign actually to copy. It means that you are famous actually.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, the exclusivity means that there is about, as far as I know, roughly 5,900 hectares of vineyards within the Tokai wine district, and all over the globe, the whole world, this 5,900 hectares can produce the Tokai Asu or any other Tokai wine. And
Yeah.
that's a really unique feature of this wine region.
So
Actually,
maybe
sorry.
interesting addition about how this myth and legend of Tokai could develop. There is an interesting fact that until bottling started, which is not much more than 100 and some years, Tokai was sold with the barrel, a natural sweet wine, no fortification, no protection from second fermentation in the barrel. There were one way to protect the wine from this fermentation, to keep it always at low temperature, about 10, 12 Celsius. And in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, without any artificial cooling or air conditioning, the cellars you can see now behind me were the only places to guard, to keep the wines from during the summer, hot summer months. And after the temperature dropped outside in November below the cellar temperature, it was the time to ship to sell the sweet wines. But Tokai was very limited where we could sell the wine. Without filtration, without stabilization, we could sell, ship, transport in the winter, but only to those areas which had similarly or even cooler cellar. So this is why from the 16th, 17th century, technically, Tokai could be sold only to those areas which are close to Tokai and has a cooler climate. So it was mainly Poland and Russia because of the large population, big market, little bit in Scandinavia, but there were no way to ship it to the Mediterranean or Western Europe. There were one exception we just talked about earlier, the Essentia, where it's so rich that technically it cannot ferment, or even if there is a very minor fermentation, the wine is fully enjoyable. So that's why these cellars were absolutely necessary and unavoidable until the 20th century. But most of us, even Royal Tokaji or Remus, are still using, if I'm correct, Zoli, to age the wine. It's just, if someone comes to Tokaji, this is probably the most characteristic things are these little doors in the hillside. You can find, usually they were just carved into the soft volcanic rock, which gives the minerality. It was easy to carve the tunnels, but it's also relative easy to take the minerality for the vineyards. And you can find, it's estimated to be several hundred kilometers of underground labyrinths in Tokaji, which were used in the past centuries, and even now, most of them to age the wines during the hot period of the year.
It's
and
fantastic site inside the cellars. As far as I know, the noble rot on the cellar walls and basically covering everything, even the bottles in the cellars, contributed also to the special characteristics of the Tokaji wine.
Yeah, so that's not noble rot on the bottles downstairs in the cellar. It's a cellar mold, actually, which covers the walls. And we consider here in Tokaji that mold, which covers the cellar walls, also part of our terroir, actually. It's very, very integrated, and it leaves downstairs in the cellar because of the evaporation of the barrels. So he is also a very good Tokaji drinker downstairs there. So it's very interesting. If you have wine downstairs in the cellar, the mold is growing, but if you take it out, the mold stops growing and starts growing again when you take again back the wine to the cellars. And one thing what you saw on Savol's previous picture, the entrances of the cellars, they look very often as small chapels, actually. In Hungarian, we call them as a cellar chapel, the entrances of the cellars. And Royal Tokaji also has his historical cellar, which has 1 kilometer in length, which was started to be built at the end of the 13th century, actually. So it goes back those times, which is a sign that even those times in the wine region, they produced people the sweet wines, actually.
Well, would anybody who's listening in like to comment on the two wines we've had tonight? Any of the audience there? The second wine, I've actually had a little glass and managed to finish it. But, you know, it's honey and candied fruit and, you know, that sort of Christmas candied fruit. But the acidity really keeps it fresh and clean on the palate. So excellent, fantastic.
Thank you.
No more question. Oh yes, there's a question.
Yeah, Tokaji is the best botrytis wine by a huge margin, and this Royal Tokaji is the most interesting I ever tasted. I would like a larger bottle. Yes, so we produce 250s and 500 milliliter bottles. So Negociant has both sizes, so you have it in Australia. So you can have it, ref, and you are a very good wine drinker. You have a very good taste. Mentioning Tokaji is the best botrytis wine in the world. I totally agree with you.
I do know a little bottle store in Sydney that stocks both sizes of this wine. And can happily point you in the correct direction for that, Raf.
Okay, well, I guess it's time to say goodnight and good morning to the people in Hungary. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you joining us with the knowledge and descriptions about the wines. And hopefully this is going to get more Australians interested in trying Hungarian wines, not just Tokaji, sweet and dry, but all the wines of Hungary. And I'm certainly going to put a few more into our shop. Well, Joe is anyhow, he doesn't know that yet, but so Joe, there's a few dollars for you to spend on a few extra Hungarian wines there this month. Well, thank you again. And
thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, it's been, well, that was a pleasure, but it's been fantastic that you've taken the time to spend with us. Really good.
Yeah, on my behalf, I would also like to say many, many thanks to the participants from Hungary, because it was very valuable time that they devoted to this program now. Zoltán Kovács, General Director of Royal Tokaji, Újfalusi Szabolcs, Sales Director of Tokaji Oremus. So we have received the best guides for today's tasting. Thank you guys very much for joining us.
Yeah.
This is the third one we've run now, and this one quite easily sold out the quickest. So everyone that did get their hands on a bottle was quite lucky. So it's been sold out for well over a week now. I think that is scope to certainly do another one in the future, perhaps.
Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this will actually go onto our YouTube website, won't it, as a permanent video?
Yep. So anyone that is interested in getting their hands on a bottle, it'll be live on our YouTube channel, The Oak Barrel, and also on our Facebook page, The Oak Barrel, as well, to go back and watch at a later date or at your leisure.
And with 2 bottles of wine and a couple of friends, when things open up a bit, a couple of friends and sit around and discuss the wine in more detail.
Yeah, we recommend at least 6 bottles.
At least 6 bottles. I'm sure the winemakers do too. Oh, thank you, and I'll say goodbye from Australia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time.
Aye.
Tokaji.
Yes.
Okay.